Okay, so as soon as I hit it tells me I'm live. I'm getting that red bar. That's usually not a good thing. If, if I can't get let's see. I just want to say hello to my YouTube audience. I'm at the Springfield Free Public Library in Springfield, New Jersey. You got the graphic up there in the corner of the screen. I've been doing this for 40 years. You think I know that I have to point in the opposite direction. 66 Mountain Avenue, Springfield, New Jersey. Phone numbers up there too. Welcome to my regular audience here. So we're going to get our presentation underway tonight. We've got a nice audience here. We're going to talk weather. So you folks put your questions up on the chat. My Patreon members, put your questions up on the chat, and we will get this going in short order. So now let's get that window up. Here we go. Window capture. Okay. So welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming out. Really appreciate it greatly. I'm Joe Chaffee. I work right now at FiOS One News, Long Island, New Jersey, and New Jersey. My colleague Joe Rayo, you may see from time to time, FiOS One News. He does Hudson Valley, but tonight he's certainly, if you're part of my Facebook crowd, Joe and I usually try and do a nightly show. We call it the Joe and Joe Weather Show. If you're not on my Facebook page, you need to be there. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Just like it, and you can get to watch the Joe and Joe show. And if you need be, you can always message me from there. So we're going to talk about a number of different things. I tend to jump around. I know the primary focus now, of course, is going into the winter month, and I'm here to answer the question that I, of course, know exactly to the hundredth of an inch, just how much snow is going to fall right outside the library door. Because I'm often astounded of the what I call zip code forecasting, which is something I really don't do, where someone will ask me how much snow is going to fall, and they will literally tell me like their address. Okay, so my response to that is, okay, so are we talking? Do you want to know how much snow is going to be falling on your driveway to the left? To the left of the still unclean grass that has leaves on it. Just this. I can't do zip code forecasts because if I did zip code forecasts, I wouldn't survive, just from the standpoint of the demand. But by the way, I also for many years I was on New Jersey 101.5 radio. On weekends, I worked with Alan Casper, who was on New Jersey 101.5 for well over 20 years. He's now retired. He and I talk. Actually, he's the reason why I started in television. Going back just a little brief history of me. This is back in the 70s when cable was in its infancy and nobody had remotes really. But I was interning at the college intern at the National Weather Service in New York when they were at Rockefeller Center. And I happened to pick up a phone. My job was to, well, among other things, to pick up phones. So when I picked up the phone that was on hold, it happened that he was on the other end. And I was always a huge fan of his. He was probably the reason in terms of my inspiration in wanting to be on television and wanting to forecast weather. And it turned out that I picked up that phone. Nick Gregory, who works at Fox 5, was interning there. He was going back to school at Linden State College, and this was a paid internship, which is even better. So he was going back to college, so he had an opening. He had a job opening for somebody to come and help him out in the office during the fall. And he offered it to me over the phone. We hadn't even met. And I took it, and I started at Channel 2, right here in New York City. From there, I went to the Today Show for 2 years. I worked with Willard Scott at the very beginning that he arrived there while I was still in college. And then my on-air career began in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1982. 1983, I went to New Orleans, and I worked in New Orleans for 3 years. Then I came back in 1986 for the startup of News 12 Long Island, which at the time was just in Long Island before they expanded to New Jersey. And then I went to WPIX TV in New York, briefly to Channel 4, 6 years at the IRS, which is a whole other story. And then I'm back at FiOS 1 News. Yes?
What do you study in college to become a meteorologist?
What do you study in college to become a meteorologist? Okay, aside from the um, the meteorology courses, and you're going to take courses in synoptic meteorology, which is weather maps, learning how to read weather maps, learning how to draw weather maps. These days, computers do all of that for you, but back in the day, we had to hand draw them. And I actually think that that was a very good experience for me as a forecaster, because it was kind of like getting my hands dirty, getting into the data, and used to have to hand plot this stuff. But nowadays it's a lot of that's already done for you. But it is a good experience, and you're taught how to read maps, plot maps. Oceanography, an understanding of the ocean is very important. How the ocean impacts weather, ocean water temperatures, et cetera, et cetera. You also take physics, thermodynamics. Um, I also took chemistry because I was one of my favorite subjects, actually. Um, a lot of math, a lot of math. From the standpoint of the broadcast end of it, uh, there was nothing on the broadcast end of it when I went to school. The broadcast end of it uh, nowadays is a lot of schools have weaved that in to, I'm just gonna, a lot of schools have weaved that in to meteorology programs, and we have a lot of schools where you get a hands-on experience in terms of being on air, and that's a huge advantage. A lot of the kids that come out of school now are very savvy when it comes to camera work, and in fact, because the youngsters here of various ages, you have your phone, okay? So you're doing videos, or when you get old enough, you'll have your phone. I'm impressed. When you get old enough and you have your phone, you know, people are very savvy with doing videos. This is a great tool to get your on-air, experience in there. And the fact that your world is changing because gradually you're going to be moving away from the broadcast mediums that we have now. 5 and 10 years from now, uh, the delivery of the information through newscast is you're probably not going to recognize it. You can turn the TV on now and understand what I'm getting at when I say you don't even recognize it. The whole concept of news has changed. One of the wonderful things that I've discovered, and sadly too, because I probably was born about 20 years too early, was that for me, this medium that we have now that's evolved with social media and YouTube, or something like YouTube, Vimeo, or whatever it is, but the ability that I have to have my own channel opens up so many possibilities for a number of the younger folks going forward as far as what they can do with their future. Because if you can't uh, do it through a TV station, you can do it yourself. And if you're good at it, you can build an audience and hopefully be able to earn a living from it. But you have a lot of choices ahead of you, and a lot of things to absorb. And you have to be social media savvy through all of this, because that is going to be front and center with regards to how you're going to take your graduating from college. When you get to that point, if you decide that this is your career, social media is going to be front and center through all of that. And also, by the way, I would recommend for those of you in this with respect to school, it's not just this. Get a varied education. Take some history courses. Take some English courses. Take some literature courses. Uh, those are all really, really important things. You want to be a well-rounded individual. You don't want to be just kind of tunnel visioned and you know, you learn some stuff that's not necessarily on that you can read off the internet. Get a nice old book, get Shakespeare, you know, get Arthur Miller, uh, read that stuff, and it helps you. It does help you. It helps you in two ways. You learn something new. You also you need a break from this stuff. You can't be doing weather 24/7. You need a break from this stuff. A distraction is a good thing. These are good, healthy distractions. So let me talk about a couple of things because Hurricane Michael was front and center. And I know that we're not a coastal area here, but depending, and I don't know how your Sandy impact was here in terms of wind in this area. Did you have a lot of tree damage? Did you had all of that? So you know your primary issues with tropical systems here are going to be wind and heavy rain and flash flooding. It's not the same thing with regards to what happened, obviously, in coastal New Jersey, down towards Seaside Heights and where landfall took place with Sandy. But Michael illustrates to me, and Florence this year, those two hurricanes illustrate a huge communication problem that has occurred. A lot of this, I believe, the blame for that is to be laid at the doorstep of the television news networks, who have really gotten away from doing what I think is their job, okay, and have instead opted to put reporters and weather people standing outside, putting their lives in danger because, you know, we really need to see somebody being blown away in the wind. And my life is not full unless I can see someone standing there while a piece of sheetrock comes flying down the street and smacking him in the head. This is what it really has become. And I believe in both instances it cost lives. In the North Carolina instance, and this was really infuriating to me because one of the things that you have to remember as a weather person that's communicating is I have to I try as much as I can to control the message. Okay, there are certain points that I want to make sure come front and center. Now, Florence was not an impact here, but we kind of were watching it from the stands. There was one thing that was obvious with Florence was regardless of the whether the storm was a category 5, a 4, or a 1, or even if it had weakened into a tropical storm, the issue of catastrophic rains was on the table. And what happened was that you had the networks, and they were so focused on that category number. It was a 4, weakened to a 3, weakened to a 2, which wasn't a big surprise, really. But well, it's a 2. It's not. Was a 4. Now it's a 2. The message of the catastrophic rain got lost. People made decisions that were not correct. Okay, they were, and it cost lives. And again, it's the networks kind of lose it here, and it's a frustrating thing for me. The other thing with Michael was actually the reverse. When Michael formed, it appeared that, in fact, I'm gonna see if I can find this. I'll just Google it really quick. Hurricane Michael. Michael actually wound up becoming a worst case scenario in a different way because it formed relatively quickly in the Northwest Caribbean. Actually, I'm misstating that. It isn't so much that it formed quickly, but it really sort of played itself out over just a handful of days. It went from a tropical wave to a depression to a storm to a hurricane to a Category 5 hurricane in a handful of days. It was a very fluid situation. And you see it here. This is where it was coming out of the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico, and this loop is only for, this was just on October 9th. It doesn't go far. This is in its formative stages, but it only took another 2 days for it to move into the Florida Panhandle. They went from dealing with a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane. It did not appear from all the meteorology that was in front of us, and I even said this on my YouTube show when we were watching this evolve, that it didn't look like conditions in the upper atmosphere were really overly favorable for this to develop much beyond a strong tropical storm or a Category 1. Well, guess what? Things changed. And when it suddenly became evident that that it was going to strengthen, we had to play catch up. The problem is that people have come to expect and I was saying this before in case you come in late, that whole concept of certitude. I can't tell you 5 days ahead of time what's going to happen with this. So here's Michael. This again. Why do they say that this is like the loop of the whole storm and then it's not? I'm sorry, I wasn't able to. Oh, okay. So this actually will summarize it. Um, this radar is better. This is a 54-second radar when it came in onto land. It literally strengthened at the last minute, and the eye was so obvious there on the radar. And by the time it made landfall, it had reached the cusp of Category 5 status. But my point is that there are a number of people there along the Florida Panhandle. They were dealing with two issues. One is this sort of behind the curve where we were playing catch up with the forecast. The other thing was that that part of Florida, that Florida Panhandle part, from Apalachicola, Florida, which is right about here, from there eastward, there has never been a landfalling hurricane on record, okay, up to just north of Tampa. There's a stretch there of the Florida coast that has never seen a landfalling hurricane. They've seen landfalling tropical storms, but not a landfalling hurricane. The other thing is from Apalachicola west, they have never seen anything greater than a Category 2. And then once you go west of Pensacola, the last Category 4 hurricane, you have to go back to 1951. So literally generations of people live their lives without ever seeing a major hurricane. So they had to deal, so their experience is telling them that, well, it won't be that bad here. There's one mistake that the greatest mistake that people make are the people that have actually lived through a hurricane experience, and then they say that, well, I went through Katrina. This was a great example for Louisiana. There were people that in southeast Louisiana, where I worked, not when Katrina hit, but that survived Katrina. And when Hurricane Ike came 3 years later in the western part of the state, they based their decision on the fact that, well, 3 years ago we got hit by Katrina, I survived Katrina, therefore I should be handled this. People lost their lives because they used that logic. With Florence, one of the things that really struck me was with Florence was that we had a Skype call. They had a Skype call on. I happened to be watching. I think it was NBC, and they had a Skype call on from a husband and wife who stayed behind on the Outer Banks. The ocean had completely submerged the first floor of their house. They're stuck on the second floor. There's no escape route. They were completely cut off. And there were a couple of things about it that struck me. One was what I just said. The woman said that, well, we were here a couple of years ago for Hurricane Matthew, and it wasn't that bad, so we decided to stay. The other thing that really struck me was the fact that she described that they couldn't sleep at night because they were on the second floor, and their first floor of their house is now underwater with the ocean lapping in because you can hear the waves. It's nighttime. I don't know if you've been to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's one of the prettiest places on the East Coast. I love it. It's also very dark there at night because there's not a whole lot of streetlights. And it wouldn't have mattered anyway because there was no electricity. So she described the fact that at night that you are in absolute complete darkness and all you hear is the sound of the ocean. and you're laying there in your bed thinking that, okay, at what point is my floor going to collapse and I am going to be down on the first floor? It never occurred to me. Never, I said, that stuck with me. It never occurred to me that you've got to stay there at night. You're stuck. You can't get out. No one's coming to get you. So lessons learned from every hurricane season, and this one was certainly an interesting one. Technically, it's not done yet for another 15 or so days. I'm sorry, for another 45 days. But the odds of another tropical system moving up the East Coast at this point go down pretty sharply. There's actually only been one landfalling hurricane, the latest landfalling hurricane to move up the East Coast. I believe the date on that is October 10th or 11th, and we're past that. That doesn't mean that it can't happen again. Sandy technically was not a hurricane when it made landfall. It had already transitioned over into a post-tropical storm, but that's a technical. In terms of our experience, we know that doesn't really matter. If your house is damaged from tidal flooding, it's damaged. So, the technical thing was good because insurance companies couldn't use the hurricane deductible. So your deductible, instead of being $50,000, is just the standard $500 or $1,000 or whatever you have it set at. So with respect to the winter going forward, I'm going to show you a couple of things that we look at. Let me emphasize that when it comes to weather forecasting, there are no magic bullets. What I mean by magic bullets is there's nothing that you can point to in terms of all the different technical indicators that you can look at, be it weather models or measures of extremes of pressure in the atmosphere. There's no single thing that you can point at and say, okay, this reading is this, therefore we are going to have this kind of a winter. We are still kind of in the infancy in trying to understand all the different parameters that come together with what kind of winter we have here in the eastern part of the United States and trying to forecast it. And we've also know that there is a big cold and snow need not necessarily go together. Except when it snows, you need it to be cold, obviously. But we experienced a winter 2 winters ago where we had some large snowfalls, and for many areas in New Jersey, above average snowfall. That was a winter where it only managed to get cold right around the time that you had storms impacting and that it would snow. If you think back 2 years ago in one of the February storms, I believe it was, I used to be so good at pinpointing dates. I think it was around February 8th or 9th. We were at record high temperatures in the 60s and 70s the day before. So I think it was one of the first times that Newark had actually gone to 70 or better for a high. And then the next day it was 20 with heavy snow, and many areas got 6 to 12. I know out my way on Long Island I got 12 to 18. I don't know if you realize this, but Long Island is the new Buffalo. Okay, we get unbelievable what's happened out my way where I live in the last 20 plus years. But no matter. One of the things we look at is the profile of sea surface temperatures, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. And I'm borrowing some maps that Dr. Judah Cohen has left for me. He was on my YouTube show a couple of weeks ago. Dr. Judah Cohen is a rock star among what I refer to as the snow weenies, the snow lovers. They kind of wait on his every breath as far as what his expertise is. And one of the things that he's very big on in his studies is he's been studying the growth of snow cover in Siberia and in Eurasia during the month of October. He seems to have found this correlation between how fast snow cover grows in that region during the month of October and the subsequent winter here, and because it has an impact on the winter here. So we call it Siberian snow cover growth, And also, we look at Canadian snow cover growth in North America. And we're going to get to that in a second. Let me come back to the sea surface temperatures. So I borrowed some of his graphics from his PowerPoints. I'm giving you credit, Judah, if you're Dr. Judah Cohen, if you're watching this. So uh, the yellow areas here showing above normal ocean water temperatures in the Pacific. The blue areas showing where it's below average. You'll notice that at least through the first few days of October, much of the uh, equatorial Pacific northward to about 20, 25 degrees north and going all the way across from Central America westward toward the Philippines. It starts to get colder than normal in the areas around Indonesia, but most of the Pacific is very warm. We're watching for the possibility of an El Nino. This map that you see here of the globe that's kind of stretched out oblong is showing you sea surface temperatures and sea surface temperature anomalies. How much above or below normal is the ocean water temperature? The correlation being that if there's an El Nino, it has impacts on our winter here. Usually when an El Nino, and the El Nino is, by definition, it is an abnormal warming of the ocean water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. And that, when the El Ninos are very strong, and when the warmest of that water is in the eastern part of the Pacific, right in this region, if that holds during the winter months, we wind up having warm winters here in the east with much less in the way of snowfall. Those are the kind of winters that you go up into northern New England and you can't find snow on the ground and the ski resorts are begging. Those are rare years, but it does happen. We had that happen here in 15, 16. I believe, was it December of 15, where we had the AC on while the lasagna was in the oven? Okay, right. So that was, I think that was 15, 16. And if you remember, that also, by the way, came off of two very cold, snowy winters that we had, 13, 14, and 14, 15. And I bring those up because we're going to, when we talk about the Siberian snow cover growth, we'll come back to that. Right now, there is what appears to be the possibility of a weak El Nino developing. But where that El Nino is important. And there seems to be a view that El Nino, instead of being in the eastern part of the Pacific, is going to be strong in the western part of the Pacific. When in winters where that has happened, that is a whole different ballgame. That given other parameters, depending if they're in play, one of the winters where that occurred was in the winter of 95, 96, which, if you recall, that was, yes, they're dancing in the streets, okay? They're dancing in the streets. I know this. I dance in the streets too. I get it. So we're watching that El Nino. However, there are other things that are going to be in play. It's not just a simple matter of, as I said, there's no magic bullet. You can't point to that and say, well, we've got an El Nino, therefore this is going to happen. Also, from a practical standpoint, it really doesn't change the day-to-day dilemma in terms of the forecast, because you could have that raging El Nino like we had in 15, 16. If you recall, in January of 16, we had one of our biggest single snowstorms ever with record snows in New Jersey, particularly along and west here along routes along 78, going westward. It was further west, but you still got
12 inches in Newark and 40 inches in Rainbow.
right. Okay, but still, it didn't stop us from getting a big snowstorm. And in fact, in that winter for the eastern part of the state, snowfall that winter was above average when you took the whole winter. Because again, it was one of those situations where, in the instances where the pattern relaxed a little bit, it got cold enough for snow. Yes.
How come when I was a kid, you never heard anybody talk about El Nino, you never heard anybody talk about nor'easters?
Right.
It was just like we have a storm.
Right.
What
Because, well, what changed is that, for one thing, everything needs to be taken to its natural Armageddon conclusion when it comes to um, our exposure to television. Also, when we were younger, we weren't as connected to TV, to we've got the internet now, obviously, so it's totally different. I mean, think about it. We're nonstop with this day and night, constantly. When when I grew up, it was the news that was on at 6 o'clock, the news that was on at 11 o'clock. Then they kind of expanded it to more to 5 o'clock. And we've morphed from there to 24 hours, and well, we got to fill it with something, and well, it's raining, so we'll got nothing else going on, so we'll leave that it's raining. I know it's it, the world's changed in terms of that.
Phrase come from?
Which one?
El Nino.
Oh, El Nino is Spanish. El Nino is little baby, and that is little baby boy, and it's what the phenomena was observed from the western countries of South America, and they would call it El Nino because the warming of that water would occur in November, December, around Christmas time. The opposite of El Nino, by the way, is called La Nina, little girl. And that is when little baby girl. And that happens when the opposite happens in the Pacific, where you have the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific are colder than normal. It's the opposite phenomena. And usually these things, these phenomena tend to get underway during the latter part of the fall season. And again, this is from when the areas that named this phenomena. It was discovered through research that it really didn't come to the forefront in terms of research, and in terms of where climatologists and meteorologists started looking at it until probably during the 1980s. And then they kind of were able to sort of go back and look at prior data and say, well, it looks like we had El Ninos in 1950, 53. I'm just picking numbers out of the hat. I'm just saying. But then they kind of did the back research to fill in the blanks, and then they looked forward. So though that is one phenomena that we look at with regards to the winter forecast.
You mentioned you distinguish between the eastern and the western Pacific.
Right.
Where is that change?
The actual point.
Become the Pacific.
Okay, so what we
Other than
usually
western.
What we usually do is it's Eastern Pacific until we get to about 140 degrees west, which is that's where I use the Weather Service definitions. At 140 degrees west, that's where the Central Pacific starts, and that goes out to about the international date line. So Hawaii is in the very center of that, what would be considered the Central Pacific, and then the Western Pacific is when you go west of the international date line. So this El Nino for this year, it seems, wants to develop more toward the central and particularly more toward the west. That could be problematic for our winter here, as far as having a colder, snowier winter, as opposed to having it in the east. Yes?
So we hear that El Nino term so much more often than the La Nina. Is that because of global warming or just general climate warming?
The Pacific oscillates from El Nino to, actually the Pacific, the El Nino to La Nina. It's a natural oscillation that occurs, and it's roughly every 4 or 5 years. So you get, a spike up, then you get, like last year actually was a neutral. It was neither El Nino or La Nina, and then it'll go to, then it'll go down, and then goes back to neutral, then goes back up. There hasn't, as far as I know, and I'm not 100% sure. I haven't seen anything that says that the frequency of the El Nino or La Ninas have changed in the last 20 or 30 years. And one of the disadvantages we have, it's a perception disadvantage as well, is the fact that we're very data limited, relatively speaking. We can only go back so many years as far as data is concerned. So there's a perception sometimes that everything that we see is new. and I pretty much think that it's not. Everything that it's new to us if we haven't obviously we haven't seen it, but I would probably bet the bank that whatever's been happening has been happening. It's happened before. It's just that we haven't been able to experience it. Um, I also, I mean, from a deeper standpoint, I also think that as a society we've gotten uh, a sense of narcissism where you know where we get this idea and it's projected. It's this idea that this is new. It's never happened before. It's only happening to me. Me. Actually, Hurricane Michael was a great example of this. I know it's right, but I'm serious. Hurricane Michael was a great example of this because CNN ran this headline, and the headline said, "Michael strengthens from a." I wish I could remember the exact wording, but the wording, what happened was Michael went from a tropical depression to a hurricane in about 24 hours time. Okay? They worded the headline in such a way as if to imply that it was a breaking news. Breaking news. Michael strengthens from, I think that's what Michael strengthens from tropical wave to hurricane in 24 hours. Okay? And the implication was that this has never happened before. Well, breaking news. It has happened before. Happens all the time. Happens, if it doesn't happen every season, it happens every other season or every third season, but it happens. And I get mad when I see stuff like this because it drives me nuts.
Joe, I'm just trying to figure out who is the European model? What's her name?
Oh, wait, I got a funny story. Wait. Hang on. No. This is a relevant question. This is a relevant question because this goes to the heart of stuff that's been going on lately, and I'll explain. So, I think it's now going back 2 years ago. Who's on my Facebook page? Raise your hand. Okay, so you see my posts, right? You see my website posts. I write a headline. And a little explainer, a link. You go click on the link, you read the post. That's just kind of how it works. Well, so I write this post, and I pull up this map, something like this map. So I'm going to show you it. It's something similar. So here's this is the European model map that you're talking about. And you see this map? Now, this particular map is the surface map, the H's and L's at the surface, and the colors are the jets. Basically, the colors are showing you the jet stream. As you go from the dark red, that's very warm. You go to the darker blue, that's very cold. And it's showing us the flow in the upper atmosphere, okay? So I wrote a post, and it was with regards to a winter storm. And the post said, European model and Canadian model battle it out. And it was a post about the fact that the weather models were having trouble trying to decide where this next storm was going to go, if it was going to come up the East Coast. I put up a map similar to this, all right, as the picture that comes up. I go to my Facebook page maybe about 20 or 30 minutes later, it's gone. I can't get on my Facebook page, my Facebook weather page. So I start to panic. So I get an email from Facebook. Your account has been suspended for pornography. Okay? You can appeal it. We might answer it. We might not. You could be suspended for a few hours, a few days, or permanently. But we're not telling you. I'm racking my brains out. I'm thinking, pornography? What? It's a weather page over here. It took me almost 2 hours. I'm going through all my posts. I said, for what I could see. And then I suddenly hit me. The colored map, the way the colors kind of were shaped, you can fill in the blank, okay? And then the headline, I'm reading European model and European model battle it out. Those bots read it that it was a pornographic thing. So I wrote in the appeal. I said, Yeah, and I was angry, and I wrote back on the appeal, dear Facebook, you're idiots. This is okay. This is a weather blog. I run this is a weather page with a weather website. These are weather maps. There's nothing pornographic here. So I got restored within 20 minutes. So that's the Amora who she is, okay? Because yeah, it's that's the other thing about this. I had my YouTube channel, videos pulled on my YouTube channel because for those of you, I don't know, Ryan, if you've been around long enough, but do you remember when I had my cat?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had this beautiful black cat. He was the size of a mountain lion, okay? And as gentle as a kitten. And he loved everybody. And he was also very much computer and camera savvy because he knew when I was doing live videos, he would come out from wherever he was and he'd walk in front of the screen. And then he used to go, I have my kitchen behind me. Right. So you would see, he would go in the cupboard, the top cupboard, and in the top cupboard I have a box that's got vitamins, aspirin, all that stuff. He would go in and with his paw, he would climb on the microwave and stand up on two hind legs in the top cabinet, open it up, pull the box out, and I wouldn't know until I'd hear this monumental crash. And I turned around and I described it. I said, well, my cat just went into the closet and pulled out all my meds and meds and drugs and knocked it on the floor. Well, I said the key word meds and drugs, and the bots caught it. And they pulled my video because I was promoting drug use. So I had to write another email. Dear YouTube, it's my cat. It's a weather thing. He's back there pulling those are vitamins. Okay, I'm just describing what he's doing. And then they restored it right away. But it's part of the world that we live in. Okay, so back to wintertime. All right, so we got these ocean water temperatures that we're looking at. Now, the next thing is, and this is going to go to Dr. Judah Cohen, and I put, I'm going to open that image and I'll open this image. So the other thing that Dr. Judah Cohen's work really goes with the Siberian snow cover growth. Now what this chart is, every one of those little swiggly lines is the growth of how fast does the snow cover in Eurasia or Siberia grow during the month of October. Dr. Cohen has found a correlation between the fast rate of growth in that neck of the woods and the kind of winters that we have here. When snow cover growth in Siberia grows quickly in the month of October, it tends to lead to colder and snowier winters here in the Northeast. And there's a reason for that. Siberia is well, the idea is that Siberia is a freezer. It is an area where you get the formation of a lot of winter cold air masses. And depending on how the jet stream is connected, those cold air masses will migrate into Canada, and sometimes those true deep Arctic air masses come down into the eastern part of the United States. They seem to happen more in years where we have rapid snow cover growth. Last year is the dark green line. I'm sorry, the green line. It's not exactly a dark green line, but it's that green line here. That is last year's snow cover growth, which finished very close to the top of the range. So if you wanted to use that as a single indicator and say, snow cover growth in Siberia when it happens quickly leads to colder than average winters here in the east. Well, at least for the first half of the winter, it worked last year because we did have that icebox that occurred. And the indicator would suggest that it worked. But it's one of the things is one of the wonderful, frustrating things about weather is just as soon as you figured out what's working, it stops working. You figure out a forecast tool, a forecast. I'm a horse player, okay? I love horse racing, all right? For me, heaven is going to Saratoga every year. I actually had a horse, two horses that I was very small part owner of, that raced at Monmouth Park and won. Got to stand in the winner's circle and all the rest of it. And one thing about the commonality that they have is it's about math, okay? It's about odds and figuring out the math puzzle that a horse race is. And you try to find every angle that you can to give you an advantage. Did the horse win its last couple of races? Did the horse run its last quarter mile under 24 seconds? You know, I'm just throwing out examples there, and you might use that as a tool. Well, it's fine as long as you use that tool and then you wind up betting and the horse wins, but eventually what happens is you'll use those angles and the horse won't win, and then you'll have to go back and figure out why. Same idea happens in weather. We use, try to find weather angles. You try to find forecast angles that work. And once it became known, because from 2005 up until about 2014, 15, the Siberian snow cover indicator worked perfectly. But now everybody knew about it, and it didn't work in 15, 16, which had one of the highest growth rates ever seen for the Siberian snow cover. What trumped it was the El Nino that year. So it seems that one of the things is that if you have a normalized ocean in the Pacific, the Siberian snow cover indicator would work. But if you have a strong El Nino at the top of the scale, like we did in 15, 16, or a strong La Nina at the bottom of the scale, which we had in 11, 12, then maybe in those years the Siberian snow cover won't work because the atmosphere is stretched into another extreme for different reasons. Now this year in the red, at least through the middle of the month, you'll notice that the growth of snow cover in Siberia is subpar. It's down near the bottom, okay? Now, I can already see the snow lovers here. Okay, the faces are
I saw
on.
news that it was the opposite. I heard it was like one of the biggest years ever.
Okay, not the Siberian snow cover. I'm
Okay.
coming to that. See, so for where there is despair, so are you snow removal?
Snow removal, no.
Snow removal guy,
No,
snow removal
just-
guy?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, snow removal guy?
Yes.
Okay. You pay by the inch or by the
Both.
season?
Both.
Just checking.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so yeah, so there's despair. Now I'm going to bring you joy, because, and this was something that I picked up on last year. Where's the red line? Okay, this is North America snow cover growth in Canada. One of the things that happened last year, and I'm going to be very interested to see if this plays. One of the things that happened last year was that Canadian snow cover growth last year, which is in the green, was extremely strong. And by the time we got to the end of October, it was at a record high, okay, for the 13-year database. Canadian snow cover growth is outpacing that record pace through the first half of this month and shows no signs of slowing down, okay? And the reason why that is important is because while Siberia may be important because that's our refrigerator to the west, the Canadian snow cover is probably even more important because they're right here. They're right up to our north. And in Canada, the Siberian cold sources and that cold connection is there, but we don't necessarily need it. The Canadian snow cover may be more important. So right now we're running at a record pace. This could suggest, if it continues, again, one of several tools, several indicators, not the only one, that this would play into the hands of not only that we could have a cold and snowy winter, but you might guess from this that if Canada gets loaded with snow cover in October and our air is coming from there, starts coming from there on a regular basis, then maybe we're going to have an early start to the winter. One of the things I will, just as a broad thing, watch the hurricane season and watch what goes on in the tropics in the next couple of weeks. If the tropics shut down early, if we don't see any more tropical, if we see something out in the middle of the Atlantic, we don't care, okay? But in terms of seeing a tropical system that's close to us or has impacted the United States, if we shut down now and don't have any new storms, there's been some research to indicate that when hurricane seasons shut down early, winter seasons tend to start up early, which if you think about it makes total sense, okay? If your winter's gonna start earlier, it's gonna mean because colder air is coming in.
But NWS just posted 2 days ago that there's absolutely nothing going on in the tropics right now.
Right now, there's not, and that's normal, okay? This is gonna be something that we're gonna look, almost day to day. My own feeling is that there's still time for maybe another system that could pop up in the Caribbean. That if anything's gonna happen, it'll probably happen down there. This cold front that came through today is going to push down into the Gulf of Mexico. That usually tends to shut tropical storm development in the Gulf of Mexico down. If this one doesn't do it, maybe the next one will over the weekend. So the odds, tropical storm formation after the middle of October goes like almost on a straight line down until you get to the end of November. So again, if it shuts down early, that could be a clue that the winter is going to start early. But your North American snow cover here is giving you a positive indicator. So you got your boxes and your check marks. Okay, so Siberian snow cover is in the not a whole lot of snow, so we checked that box. We've got a box now on the other side for Buffalo-like snowfall for New Jersey. Check off the box for Canada snow cover, so we got that checked off. So we're kind of even. Now let me bring up the actual map that shows the snow cover here so far. Okay, and you can see that this is what's supposed to happen in October in Siberia. You get snow cover that grows. One of the things that's lacking is the fact that if you notice, all right, so here's England, okay? So this is roughly 60 degrees north latitude. It's pretty far north. You don't really have a whole lot of snow cover south of 60 degrees north yet. You need to get snow in the southern flank. So we'll be watching the next couple of weeks to see if snow fills in that southern flank, because that's important. All of that area's got to fill in, and also the western flank, going toward Eastern Europe. There isn't really very much snow on the Siberia side from there, so this is lacking, and certainly with respect to it being subpar, if you compare it to the last year, or if you compare it to the years where we've had Siberian snow cover growing rapidly, much of this area would have already been covered with snow. So it looks like it's about half of what it should be. On our side, meanwhile, this map in Canada, this is as of yesterday, I believe. Virtually almost all of Canada, except for a little pocket there up in the northwest and some pockets here in the southeastern part of Canada, are already loaded with snow cover. It looks to me like it's at least 4 or 5 weeks ahead of the game. So, and by the way, it's been very cold in Canada. While we've been sitting in that soupy humidity that we had during the second half of the summer, but particularly September into the first part of October, it's been you didn't have to go far. Go on the Canadian side. It's been very cold in Canada, and they actually saw a number of areas getting record snowfalls for the second half of the month. And in some places, not that unusual, like in Calgary, getting their earliest snow accumulations coming in during the end of September, beginning of October. So something is going on with respect to that. And now we're going to take a look at, I'm going to set up the upper air map. I have not seen any of the models today, so we're going to look at them together, and we'll take a look at what's going forward. Okay, so before we get to that, I'm going to bring up this. Okay, he's got this is technical. I'm not liking this. I can see the look. All right. So,
Indices.
yeah, I know indices is one of those icky words. Yeah, no, I get it. Believe me. These are what we call teleconnections. Think of a telephone. What was the function of a telephone? To connect you to another person. When you have that connection in the atmosphere, it moves air masses from one place to another. So we look at what these teleconnections are. They measure changes in pressure in different areas of the globe, okay? And for winter storm lovers, there are a number of things that we look at. First of all is the PNA, all right? PNA stands for Pacific North America Index. What that is that somebody came up, and it's very useful. All of these connections are useful. They are, again, not magic bullets, but they're useful. They measure changes in pressure. So the PNA focuses on changes in pressure in North America. What the areas that it calculates it from is it's actually a very large area. It looks at the changes in pressure in the Pacific Northwest, the changes in pressure off the southeast coast of the United States, and the changes in pressure at the longitude of around Hawaii and in the Pacific, that area of the Pacific. The idea is that if you have higher pressure in the Pacific Northwest, lower pressure in the southeastern part of the United States combined, and then lower pressures out in the parts of the Pacific heading out toward Hawaii, that when you calculate it and do the math, you get it, you can plot it on a scale. When the PNA index is near the top of the scale, this is favorable for storm development in the east, along the east coast of the United States. But it doesn't act alone. There's other places we got to look. So right now, this is today's forecast, and it goes out 16 days. That PNA index is very strong. It actually gets off almost to the top of the, beyond, well above its normal high value going into next week, which is, so talking about the 21st, 23rd, 25th, so right in there. Very, very strong. So this is telling us there's going to be high pressure in the east. So usually when there's high pressure in the west and in the northwest, when there's usually high pressure in the upper atmosphere in the west, there's usually low pressure in the atmosphere here in the east. So that's what that's saying. This NAO is the North Atlantic Oscillation, or what we usually refer to as the Greenland Block. That is when we have a situation where the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, is negative, we have usually some kind of blocking pattern out in the Atlantic. That can be favorable for nor'easters. It can also, but not necessarily, but it can be favorable for nor'easters. We look at when it goes negative for what we call blocking in the atmosphere, so that weather systems start moving very, very slowly if they move at all. So if you happen to be in a spot where the weather is nice and you've got a blocking pattern in play, you're likely to stay nice for a while. If you're in a bad spot, then you're likely to be in nasty weather for a while. And in the wintertime, if the Greenland block is really strong, you can get cold air that comes down from the North Atlantic, from the east, from the northeast, and comes back southward. The other area, one other area that we look at that's important is the East Pacific Oscillation, EPO, which is the same as the North Atlantic Oscillation, except it's in the East Pacific. So it measures the pressure changes there in the East Pacific. When that index is negative, which it is right now, that's when that's a good indicator. I like the EPO. Of all the indices, I like the EPO. I think that works pretty well. When the EPO is negative, it's usually colder than normal here. And you'll notice that it's negative into early next week. We get a little bit of a bump up, okay, around the middle part of next week, and then it goes back negative again toward the end of the month. So knowing all that, now we're going to look at the weather model. And this is the upper air. Okay, so you're saying, okay, Joe, what am I looking at here? All right. So this is when they put up the jet stream. And usually when they put up the jet stream, they put up, you see it on TV, they put up just like one arrow. But it really is more than that, clearly. And the way I look at it, the way I explain it is, think of lanes on a highway, okay? Each lane has its traffic, all right, in theory. And let's say if we designate the lanes that are closer to the center of the highway as being the faster lanes. So the cars that are on the left lanes are going to move faster than the cars on the right. Well, in the atmosphere, so each one of these is a lane. There's wind that's blowing. Around lows, winds blow counterclockwise. Around highs, they blow clockwise. So here we have a low. Here we have a big amorphous low in the eastern part of Canada that's dominating. So if I'm a parcel of air, and I'm somewhere out here in the Aleutians, I can follow that lane here, okay? And I'm going to move, my air is going to go like this, down, dip down into the Pacific, come into Canada, okay? And then come down here over us, then go out into the Atlantic, then turn up toward Iceland, and then turn east from there. So it's basically moving air masses. So if you're an air, if your air is coming from up here, any air mass that's up here is going to come down into the eastern part of the United States. That's what we're in right now. If this were December, you're all underdressed in a big way because we've got a connection here, and this is where the whole concept of the connections, big ridge, that PNA I showed you, the Pacific North America Index, strongly positive. Big high pressure here. See how it goes up? That's an upper high here that's up in the Pacific Northwest. The low here, that's part of that Pacific North America Index, is you have this trough that goes down into the southeastern part of the United States. So that basically takes the shape of that jet stream, just like that. So the pattern here, and this is, by the way, for today, this was today, this is the jet stream pattern. Again, if we were a month from now, we would still be, we would have just had probably a fairly strong cold front, and I would bet that tomorrow morning we'd be waking up to temperatures down in the low 20s, low and mid 20s, which for the middle part of November would be pretty cold. Now, going forward, as of course with weather, nothing static, everything changes. So that trough lifts out. You can see it from here. Between now and tomorrow, it lifts out. But watch what happens. The next one drops right in. We don't have the overall pattern right now is suggesting that cold in the east, warm in the west. Completely the opposite of what we had back just a couple of weeks ago when somebody flipped the switch upstairs. So we've got this trough in the eastern part of the United States. And notice by the time we get to Sunday, it's really strong here. It goes all the way down into northern Florida. The bottom of that jet stream goes all the way down into northern Florida. So the Sunday air mass that's coming in should be the coldest of these three shots that we've had. The one shot, we're getting another shot tonight into Thursday. The next shot's going to come Sunday and Monday. This is shot number 3. Then that lifts out. Now we've got a fourth system. It's not quite as strong as after that one lifts out, this one, at least according to what the model says, it's not quite as strong. Notice, by the way, the Pacific is changing a little bit here. That big mountain ridge that's out in the Pacific West kind of gets flattened a bit. But whatever that trough in the east remains. And all of a sudden now, toward the end of the period, this is now toward the end of next week. There's some kind of wrapped up system sitting just east of the New Jersey coast, at least according to the European. And I haven't looked at anything, so well, let's see what it has. I'm gonna bring up a closer view. That's how the upper air works, and I've often described it the way I think to best describe it is, you remember. There used to be a kid's infant toy that I remember because, when I had my kids, it was still around. It was a gearbox. It was like a puzzle with gears, and the kid would have to put the gears in the box, and then there was a handle on one of the gears. When all the gears were in place, you turn it.
Turning gear.
Right. One gear, it would turn all the other ones. And your kid would laugh and be occupied, and you'd be thankful because this way you had a few moments of peace, and you just kind of do this all day long. Well, the atmosphere, if you look at it and how that upper air moves around, it's kind of the same thing. The only difference is that those gears are always changing. They're changing in size. They're changing in shape. They're changing in magnitude in terms of how strong they are or how weak they are. And of course, all these changes are now translating to what's happening at the bottom of the atmosphere. So at least in the short term, this is the European model itself, which unfortunately, it's a privately owned model. It's not a government model. And because it's privately owned, I would have to pay huge subscription fees in order to see every time frame. So they only give free stuff every 24 hours. So going through the weekend. Okay, so here's our cold shot now. We've got this nice big high coming in for the next couple of days. Saturday is probably going to be much like today, although there might be maybe a few more clouds and showers, but here comes that next cold front, and this shot is going to be, as I said, the strongest of the three, and then that high moves out. Now here's a low. There's a surface low that comes out probably from the tropical Pacific into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what it makes it to some big storm between Cape Cod and Nova Scotia by the time we get to next Friday. But again, this is what the model shows now. It's 216 hours away. I guarantee you it will not look like this when the next run of the model comes out. Now, I'm going to bring up another tool we use. And we use the GFS model, which is our North American model. And this one, there's all kinds of data here. And this is what you, Ryan, you should be, playing with on a day-to-day basis, okay? So when your friends want to go on, Smashcast, and they want to play whatever it is that they play on those games, those video games. I know my son-in-law gets into those things. No. I have to go on Tropical Tidbits, and I got to look at my weather models, and that's where you need to be. Okay, so let's see what our friendly neighborhood GFS has to say about all of this. And I'm going to start. This is how we, by the way, when we do our forecast on a day-to-day basis, I'm showing you what we look at. And when we've got these models coming out, some of them come out as frequently as every hour. These global models like the European and the GFS, they come out every 6 hours. European actually comes out every 6 hours now, but they only let you see every 12 hours. But anyhow, now I've got the close-up view of the jet stream here in the US. And there's our cold shot for today. I can actually back it up and go back to Sunday. So here's our cold shot that is coming in, that came in earlier this week. Now here comes the next one. This is the one for tonight into tomorrow and Friday. Then that pulls away. And then here comes the next. This one's the stronger of the bunch, the strongest of the bunch. It goes much further south. So here's the one that's for tonight. And in fact, down here in the southeastern part of the United States, if I were to pull up the temperatures right now, it probably got into the upper 80s and low 90s today again in parts of southern Georgia and into North Florida. While we warmed up, but now this front's coming down, and they're going to cool off somewhat. Then that pulls out, and here comes the one. This is for Sunday, much further south. This next front here is going to push that cool air probably down into central Florida. I mean, cool for them anyway. And then you've got this energy that comes into the southwest, this blue area here. And this is the middle of next week, so it looks like we get another front maybe along about Tuesday. And then after that, see, now this is where it gets nuts here at the end of the month. There's been talk about the possibility of maybe a nor'easter for the end of the month because the models seem to be focusing on this area here. And this is kind of what happened last March 4 times, okay, in 2.5 weeks. We had, I've been doing this for a long time. That was a remarkable period to watch. It really was. To see 4 in 2.5 weeks.
Try driving it
No, and listen, believe me, I understand.
20 hours.
Oh,
I'm more concerned, our water tables are so high right now from all the rain that we've
Right.
gotten.
well, thankfully, you're gonna be
We're
draining
also-
right now.
So,
Yes.
Springfield.
yes, we have Springfield, where we
Yes.
have a high water table to begin with, all the natural springs. We have the Roe River that runs right through, and a lot of it's flood. So with all the rain that we've gotten, if we get a nor'easter.
Are you just in the flood zone, and so you have mandatory flood insurance that you have to get for your
I
homes,
do.
correct? Yeah. Yeah, I still have a place in Louisiana, in New Orleans, outside of New Orleans, so I understand that because I buy the flood insurance every year. Yeah, I mean, I'm paying about a lot. What am I paying? What did I pay last year? I think it was 1,200 for the year.
It's like
For just the-
5,000.
Really?
Yeah. Ooh.
And I'm in a zone in,
Welcome to New Jersey.
yeah, when Katrina flooded Louisiana, southeast Louisiana, there was a 1 square mile area that did not flood. My area. I got lucky.
Library is flooded multiple times.
Really?
Yes.
In this area, there's
Yes.
I have a question. I'm on, especially in the winter time, on the tropical tickets like 5 times a day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's your name, by the way?
Scott.
Scott.
Yes, I'm from, you and I email each other, I'm from Sussex County. I'm right on.
Scott.
Yeah, I came down from like the Wantage burn.
Oh
area.
God,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Mr. Bottomley.
That's correct, yes. Wanted to
I
know
am,
whether
I,
or not
I'm,
became
I'm
a
truly,
professional.
I'm truly flattered and honored that you made the drive. Thank you.
Of course.
You know, there's a few people that over the years, I've,
Oh, yeah.
you know, I have email relationships with, and have never met.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've had this situation. I worked with somebody once when I worked at the IRS where we had these sort of cubicles, and we spoke through the walls, but we never saw each other for a month, for the first month. And I had a visual. I was able to develop a visual from the voice. You can't develop visuals from emails.
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled that you came down.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you.
Yeah.
So go ahead with your. Go
I
ahead.
had a question. On the European, like when you're on the GFS and a lot of the other models, you can see precipitation amounts.
Yes. Okay.
The
So like for
European,
like this.
yes.
I'm going to pull it up.
Yeah.
This is a rainfall forecast
Yeah.
map.
And then you can zoom into the different regions and
Correct.
stuff like that.
So here's our 7 day, by the way, so this is the model's forecast for rainfall for the next 2 weeks. So the anything from the purple or higher is 2.5 inches or more.
Yeah.
So at least that's over 16 days, which is a lot if it comes over a day. It might not be a lot if you spread it out over 16. So you have to kind of look and see where it happens. But go ahead.
Is there a reason why you can't, does the European not spit that, why you can't see that with the European model?
You can, you have to pay for it.
Okay. I
Um,
didn't know, I thought that might be what it was.
Right.
Okay.
There is a site that I was given for free. They gave me a free subscription,
Yeah.
and they've never taken it away from me. Called EuroWeather,
Okay.
EUROWX. It's a little bit. The maps are better now. They've upgraded it a bit. But they go every 6 hours.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do that, and I think their subscription is reasonably cheap.
Yeah.
And I'm not subscribing to Weather Bell
Okay.
for personal reasons.
Okay. I just wanted to tell you before, I don't want to keep you, I know you got some other stuff to get to. When you were talking about the Greenland block,
Yes,
I can remember being on my couch at 11, 12 years old and 42,
yes.
watching you on Channel 11, and you would always talk about the Greenland block. Always. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it
I polluted your mind even
It
then.
could be a big snowstorm.
Yes.
My parents said that they all Joe said the Greenland block. You know, I told my parents that I was coming here today. Like, it was pretty cool.
Did they then at that point
My
just turn
mother
around and
asks me
say,
all the time, "Do you still talk to that weather guy?"
he's doing the Greenland block thing. What do we do?
Yeah. Yep. Everyone
I'm
says,
very, you know,
I should have been a weather
Well, you know
Well,
what?
I
You
wasn't
can,
good at that.
but you could, you know,
That scared me away from it.
look, you know, the it's great that we've got all this stuff now
Yeah.
because you can really kind of immerse yourself
Yeah.
into the passion with your passion. I think that's, you know, I tell youngsters this, you know, all the time. With regards to when it's time to make decisions about what you want to do with your life, do what you love, because if you work at what you love, you're not ever going to work a day in your life. Yeah, you're going to deal with the nonsense, and you're going to deal with the silliness that involves being in a work environment and dealing with the personality conflicts and all that stuff. But you know, most of the days you're going to go in and you're going to be okay with it. And your days at work are going to go relatively quickly. I spent well, when when I uh, when 2008 happened, just a quick personal note. So when 2008 happened, um, and the financial world fell apart and television stations basically fell apart, I had already lost my job at Pix. There was a general manager that came to work there at Pix in 2006 who was out of her mind. She and I don't hesitate to say it. If she were here today, she'd find out how much out of her mind I thought she was. To the point, well, to the point where I was worried about my own daughter because my daughter worked for CBS and she wound up becoming a manager up in the CBS hierarchy. And I had to, you know, my daughter had to, I told her, whatever you do, don't let her know that you're related to me. Okay. The reason is, and it was nothing I did. That's the thing. It was nothing I did. It was a situation where in television especially, you know, it's about personalities and, you know, you got somebody that has an idea of what they want a newscast to look like. And but she had this way about it where she literally would wake up one morning and just decide that she hated you. And over a course of time, one person after another wound up getting fired. I wound up being the last one of the bunch. When she got to me, but it took a while. But ultimately, she did. And then what happened is, you know, I lost my job. So I had three daughters going into they were Catholic high school, going into college. So after exhausting, being almost 50, very hard to get a job in TV when you're a guy and you're almost 50. Um, at the time, the IRS, one of the IRS offices is 5 miles from my house. And I had 2 weeks left in my health insurance and I got a job there. And I worked there for 6 years. And it was a perfectly fine job. My wife works there also. It's a perfectly fine job. It's not me. You know, um, everybody's mindsets are different. And some people some people function very well when they know that their boundaries are here and here, and they stay in those boundaries. For me, working in a creative environment all the time, my mindset's different. I look at something and I say, "Oh, we're doing it this way. I think we could do it better this way." But when you work in government, it's tough because you know it's kind of regimented. You have to do it a certain way. That sort of thing was kind of, I would say, personally destructive to me in the sense that it's what was where I didn't want to go to work. I hated it, but I had to pay bills like everybody else. And then I got back into television, and it came back, and I was able to get back, and now I'm finishing up my career on a high note. But it was a learning experience for me because it taught me discipline, and as a result, I've got my websites, I got my Facebook page and so on. And I just telling you, this is why it's important that you want to do in your life, let your passion drive you. You can always figure out a way to eat, but let your passion drive you. If you let your passion drive you and that's where it is, it'll work. You will make it work. So don't ever be scared about that sort of stuff.
Yes, Scott, go for it. You're probably smarter than those pretty boys up there.
Well, a lot of kids my age when I was up they were discouraged by because it was a different mentality. You just had this idea that, you needed you took this job because it was safe. You took this job because you were a career, you would work for 40 years and then retire. Well, that world doesn't exist anymore. People, change jobs and careers 5, 6 times in a lifetime. That's the new normal. So, like I said, pursue it. Worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't work. You'll find out and then you'll go do something else, but at least you tried. I know so many people that young kids that got discouraged by their parents because it wasn't a safe thing, but it was a different time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's exactly what I did. I took a government job. I worked for the state of New Jersey. I'm a probation officer. I've been there 19 years. I can't leave. I'm making good money now.
no,
But it's safe, but it's not my passion. I mean,
no, I know,
I'd
but
rather
you know
go
what?
do
You can.
this than go to the jail every
No, I
day.
understand, but you know what? You can channel. But this is available now for you to
Yes.
channel your passion, which
Yes.
wasn't when I
Yes.
came through.
I have a weather-related question.
Yes,
Okay, you said that the snow cover over Canada
yes.
is great this year. How does that reconcile with the notion of global warming?
It doesn't, because of the fact that we're only looking at 1 year. The 4 nor'easters from last year in March was 4 nor'easters in March. Hurricane Michael is a Category 5 hurricane in the month of October. Was also, what I'm getting at is all these things are singular events. So you can't really look at a singular event and say, this happened, therefore it must be because of global warming. Now, let me clarify. If you look at the data, if you and you can get into arguments. No, we're not, because we're still here. He needs to know this. So, I've dragged these things out. We've gone from being chased out of the building to finishing them up in the parking lot. So, singular events can't be looked at as part of global warming. When you look at the data, it's clear that the Earth has warmed over the last 100 some odd years. Okay, we hit a cyclical bottom in the long term, and I'm not an expert at this. This is just my own, kind of observation from what I've done some research on, minimal research. Global temperatures bottomed out during the little ice age that went from the mid 1600s to the early 1800s. So we've been climbing up off those lows, and still but we seem to have reached some kind of plateau when you look at the statistics. You can't look at singular events and say this is because of global warming. However, there are questions that rise from this. For example, it seems that in general, the number of snowstorms over the last 20 or so years that have produced 20 or more inches is on the rise here in the northeastern part of the United States, particularly right along the immediate coast, and particularly right over where I live. Okay, now you can make an argument that says that the warming of the atmosphere by those couple of degrees, the warmer an atmosphere is, the more water it can hold, the more moisture it can hold. And maybe that's the reason why some of these snowstorms are producing more snow than they used to. And I can at least attest to the fact that if you look back between 1970 and 2000, the number of snowstorms in our area in the Northeast was a lot less. The number of big storms were far fewer than they have been in those prior 30 years than what we've seen in the last 18. And in some places by a factor of 2 or 3 times as many that we've seen in those last 18 than in those prior 30. But you could make the argument and say, well, it's all fine and dandy that we've had all these 20-inch snowstorms in the last 20 years. And if you look back on the records, we don't seem to have as many. But we also, when you look back in the records, you have far, far less data to look at than you do now. And you wind up having to guess. We can measure snow now when you get, I could remember a time when you would get a snowstorm and the number of measurements were few and far between. Some snow guys would call it in on the phone, but you could have whole counties where you didn't have a number. All right, so you would just kind of guess at it. Now with everything that we have, there isn't a snowflake that goes by that comes down that isn't accounted for by somebody somewhere. So you can go back and say, well, maybe the reason why we don't have a lot of 20-inch snowstorms when we look back at, say, the 60s, 50s, 40s, and 30s was because, well, we didn't have a whole lot of measurements. Maybe we did have those 20-inch snowstorms, and they just didn't happen to be in those areas where we got the numbers from. So we don't know. A lot of the numbers that we did have, most of them seem to be concentrated around urban areas, and urban areas usually wind up getting less than areas out to the east. Where I live, prior to 1970, there was the Long Island Express. I live in central Long Island. The highway ended there. I mean, you had to go from there almost to Bridgehampton to find the nearest weather observer from MacArthur Airport. There's a 20-30 mile stretch from MacArthur to West Hampton Beach to Bridgehampton, where there was an observer there who I don't even know if he's still alive, but I think he kept records for like 60 plus years. I forgot his name. In New Jersey, for example, there was a time where you had Newark and Teterboro, and that's it, And you would hope that we used to call Alan Casper and I had nicknames for I don't mean this is not insulting, okay? I don't mean it to be, but you got to remember it was the 70s and the 80s. But we used to call Northwest Jersey the gas station because at the time it was so scantily populated that if you drove up there, some of the towns was literally like a building and a gas station. So we would kid around and say, did so and so call from the gas station to let us know how much snow fell? And then we had South Jersey, which I won't even. We'll leave it there. That may get me into trouble. We'll leave it there. So the data is much more available now. We have the ability now, by the way, one of the things that's happening that's of big interest to us here, by the way, is the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is that warm stream of water that runs up the Atlantic seaboard and then goes out across the Atlantic and reaches, its tentacles go out to areas south of Iceland, Ireland, and England. That actually acts as a way for them to see their winters get tempered somewhat because of it. Well, one of the things that's happened apparently is that movement of water from the subtropical Atlantic, from Florida, up the East Coast and out into the Central Atlantic. In the Central Atlantic, that Gulf Stream motion seems to have broken down, and we're not sure why. It was predicted by what was his name now? Oh my God, from Colorado State University, the hurricane guy. Bill Gray. Dr. Bill Gray of Colorado State University, who was very big on hurricane forecasting, had predicted that the Gulf Stream that would break down in time with what he saw that was going on. He was ridiculed by some pretty big people, including some researchers out of Columbia University who basically took his work and shredded it apart and tore it apart. And lo and behold, that seems to be happening. We have the ability now, what they're doing is they're dropping computer sensors into the ocean in that area to try to understand why that's happened. And it's important to us because the Gulf Stream in the spring is a very important way that we warm up here. And it could be one of the reasons why, if you look at the last couple of springs, they have been extremely late, especially the last two springs, extremely late in getting underway. The breaking down of the Gulf Stream could be causing our winters to be extended into and through the month of April. And if you look back at records, there have been instances, we have had stretches where that's happened. So maybe it's tied to they're trying to figure that out. And that's the one thing that's different now is that we have this, you know, we're finding these things out to see how these things work, and uh, they may not give us final answers in our lifetime, but at least it gives us a better understanding about why certain things are happening, and they might be part of the natural cycle. That's yet to be determined.
So they say typically you have like this late, I'm sorry.
Okay, you first, and then you.
Okay, when you say the Gulf Stream is breaking down, what does that mean? It's not moving? Is that what you mean?
It moves out to the middle part of the Atlantic. I think I can find it. Let me see if he's got a map big enough. Okay, let's see. It's kind of hard to see here, but you see where the light blue is from the green. Okay, it's really tough to see on this tight map, but there's warm water that comes off the North Carolina coast where I've got my mouse, and you see this green and yellow here. So that's part of the Gulf Stream. This green area of warmer water, so this is water temperatures that are about 75 degrees or higher, should go all the way across the Atlantic and then kind of turn up this way and then start to weaken. It's not even making it halfway now, and it looks like it's kind of broken down. Again, why and the impacts, those are the big questions. You'll notice, by the way, the tropical waters are still very, very warm, but that's not unusual. We are, by the way, also seeing our water temperatures here have been unusually warm because of the kind of summer we had with this persistent south or southeast wind, because that brings the water that's warm out to our east and brings it out to the shore. Well, this weather pattern that we're in now is going to cool that ocean in a big hurry with the northwest wind, upwelling. The depth of the warm water doesn't go very far down. So with the wind, it's going to overturn, get upwelling of the water. You're going to get those water temperatures to cool down. But that, again, this is, the implication is that it's causing our winters to get extended late. And that's could be why we've had the last couple of winters like this. Now, is this a short-term phenomenon, or is this something that's going to continue for a while? Is this the beginning of something new? I don't know.
Wouldn't that be catastrophic for Great Britain?
Well, once upon a time, Charles Dickens wrote White Christmas for a reason, because in the day that he wrote A Christmas Carol, the visions and the imagery in A Christmas Carol was the white Christmases that they had in England in the 1800s, which were extremely common because they were coming out of the Little Ice Age. If the Gulf Stream breaks down, it could mean more colder winters for Britain and for Ireland. Dublin had its first foot plus snowstorm since the early 1980s last March. And this, what's that? And Scotland, Scotland gets a lot of snow, especially in the Highlands. But it got cold, and England had a very cold winter last year as well, with a lot of snow, especially in the southern part. So it may impact their winters if that's the case. You were next, and then you.
So there's winters, in the past, in my youth, I can remember just many times when you get to March and warm up. And
Yeah.
You have this thaw. But what's been happening now is you get like the period in maybe January where it kind of calms,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the second half of the winter that's just extending longer and longer. And it seems like all of the seasons are kind of migrating further. This is unusual this year. Actually this year and last year actually got cold earlier. Generally, it's warmer later,
Right.
colder later, and warmer later.
Right.
And that March thaw, and I'm in the landscape business because I'm very aware of the lack of ability to work.
Sure.
Is disappearing.
Well,
whereas you could be able to start doing cleanups in March.
Well, last year your business was horribly impacted because of the fact that you couldn't even do the cleanups.
That's correct.
The leaves didn't come down.
But there was a period
You had about
early March.
Right.
We had like 10 days where it got warm and weird, and then dry. And
But then
it
you
back
also-
out till the end of April.
But then you also had the period going into last winter in November where the leaves didn't come down until the refrigerator appeared.
Right.
And
there was snow
yeah.
on the grounds.
And then you couldn't.
It did warm up for a little period. period, we got it done, but then it dropped again.
Right.
But that seems to be more of the environment now, where you get everything just later, you know?
And
So-
part of, this might be, I mean, this isn't something that just happened overnight. I mean, this breakdown of the Gulf Stream is probably something that's been progressing over the last, 5 or 10 years.
Right, you always get 1, 2 nor'easters in March, where last year you had 4, which was
Right.
ridiculous. But is that, and this year it starts to feel like last year again, with the early cold now setting in.
Which probably means that there will be a break in between. What I've experienced, there's a couple of observations that I made over my years of doing this. The pattern the pattern winds up locking in at some point. Last year it locked in very early. It used to lock in toward the middle or latter part of December, and then that pattern would hold into February, and then you might get a brief break, and then a short sort of repeat performance
Right,
going into March, and then it would just go away.
right.
Last year was the first 6 weeks from late November to mid-January was really, really cold. The second 6 weeks from mid-January to the beginning of March was really, really warm. And then the third period from March into the first part of April was cold for the time of
But
year.
it was later than that.
Well, it went
20th.
deeper into April,
20th.
but for March and April, it was really cold relative to the time of year, and then it was crazy stormy with the 4 nor'easters. And that was the blocking, because the blocking pattern, that North Atlantic oscillation, reared its ugly head. And you have your question.
It's a kind of an observation that from the evening of December 25th, Christmas evening, through the morning of January 9th last year, the temperature did not get above freezing.
Correct.
For all
16 days, I think it
16
was.
days straight. And you guys had a big storm, like from that eastern, on the Jersey Shore through Long Island. I was kind of jealous, because it wasn't nice. You got like 4 inches, and this thing had 16. I was like, oh.
That's right, my brother in Stony Brook, he'd get bombed and we'd get.
Oh, your brother's right near me.
Yeah, you near Stony Brook?
I'm just south. I'm in Center Reach, which is the town right south of Stony Brook.
So,
Yeah.
And then not only that, but like on February 17th, in Newark, it was in 80 degrees for the first time ever in February.
This was last year.
Yeah. And then what happened in March?
4 days later,
I have, you know what? You reminded me. Let me put, the snow lovers would love this. Somebody sent me this. I gotta, let me bring it up. This is how snow enthusiasts look at the winter. Okay? Okay, not the camel. Hold on. Come on, load. There we go. So this is my Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, it's meteorologist Joe Chaffee is my weather page.
Do you know all the other weathermen on Channel 1?
Yes, I do.
I really love
I'm the daddy of the bunch.
Yeah, I love Angelo Pinero on the weekend.
You know,
He's a dog.
Andrew and I get along really well because we both have wickedly sarcastic, dark senses of humor. But this is how weather enthusiasts. Yeah, and Andrew's a good guy. He really is, and he's very much into cars. All right, it's loading, but oh, come on. No, it's just slow to load. That, by the way, I took this picture today, was right on from Jersey City. Oh, here it is. Okay, so these are how weather enthusiasts look at the winter every year on the internet. October, November, hype winter, Siberian snow, all the seasonal forecasts. Then in December, they all come on and say, winter's over. You know, there'll be a couple of warm days, winter's over. January and February, winter happens. March, winter is still happening. Why? April, I knew it all along. It's so true. I saw this and I was like, because I know Josh. I said, Josh is perfect. It's exactly correct. So,
But I know, Joe, I watch you on TV a lot of the times.
Thank you.
You do say.
Thank you.
You say none of this is, everything is unpredictable.
Well, it's written. Well, nothing's written in stone.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can't say exactly how many inches.
I don't know about unpredictable. I like to try to think that I could nail them all.
Yeah.
You know, at least I try
Admirable that
to.
you admit.
Well, you know, listen, I'm a human, rumors to the contrary. And they, yeah, you know, and yeah, you know, one of the things that, look, when it doesn't work for me, if I mess up, I mess up, and I say so. I don't think there's any shame in that. Um, where I get annoyed is when, you know, again, we're going back to that whole point about weather forecasting certitude, but particularly with hurricanes, when we've had instances where we've had warnings up and, you know, things change and it doesn't wind up being as bad. I get people that are actually angry about that. I mean, not weather enthusiasts, but people being angry about it because they've been, you know, they might have had to cancel a party. They might have had to, you know, if they have a boat, they might have had to bring the boat out of the water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, my response to that is, uh, gee, I'm sorry you didn't get the tragedy you were hoping for. You know? And yet every year, I know you got the watch, you're getting ready. Oh, I will just finish it just from saying, because now you're old enough, but I would used to say, when someone used to say to me, boy, you know, I wish I could get paid and be wrong 90% of the time. And my response to that is that, well, you know what? It's almost always a guy that says it. Well, ladies, you're always a lot kinder to me, and I appreciate that. But guys are always, you know, it's like the head bull walking into the room, and he's got the shoulders are out. Yeah, you're wrong 90% of the time, and you can still get paid. And I usually respond by saying, well, you know what? Be thankful that with that success rate that I'm a meteorologist and not your urologist. that usually like stops. Because then the response that I often get after that says, well, I was talking about somebody else. I really wasn't talking about you. You're really good. Says, would you like to go on? You know, but it's part of my world, and and I live with it, and I love every minute of it. And, you know, and I thank everybody for being out here. And it's like I said, we almost pushed it out to the parking lot. Yes, Ron.
Do you think the breakdown of the Gulf Stream could potentially have an impact throughout this past hurricane season? The hurricane dragging up the East Coast.
Well, it might, but that's a question. That's one of those. That's one of those really good hypothetical questions where see you're doing the right thing here when you do that. You're saying we've got this action. So what is the reaction? What is the opposite reaction that's going to happen? And that is something that we're going to have to look ahead to. Maybe the breakdown of the Gulf Stream might mean stronger nor'easters on the East Coast, but on the other hand, it might not.
Because the thing is, I don't know if hurricanes, are they attracted to the Gulf Stream?
That's
like in terms of attracted.
Yes.
Let's the same way
Yes,
upside down.
and a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise. Can we do a selfie with you?
Yeah, of course. The Gulf Stream is supportive of hurricanes off the southeast coast of the United States where it does have impact. Notice that in Florence it did not. Because Florence weakened, even though it was moving into the Gulf Stream, should have strengthened, but it did not. So
does it have an impact on the track though?
it has some impact on the track. There were instances last year with some of the last couple of years. We've been dealing with these weather models that have been showing storms being further out offshore, if you remember, and how they used to come in closer and closer to the coast as we got closer and closer to the storm time frame. And you know, I did see a few times a few forecasters from NOAA in some of their technical discussions talking about the position of the Gulf Stream being further to the left, and models having a bit of a difficult time coming to grips with that. We'll take it. Come on. All three. Ready? Set.
I can take a picture of you.
Done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
I really do like you, and I would never say that to
Oh,
Jerome.
bless your heart. Thank you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Oh, sure. Sure. Oh, yeah, very much. I worked with him briefly.
How's your fishing going?
I haven't gone in weeks. My fishing husbands have abandoned me. So,
Because I always see on your boat your cigar.
well, it's not, no, that's my buddy Phil's boat.
But I love
It's my cigar, but it's his boat. Oh, Adam, sure. Oh, thank you so much. Speaking of which, thank you so much. I didn't recognize you from your pictures.
That's
You
all right.
did
Yeah,
this.
it's want to do a selfie.
Well, cigars were really good.
Is it good?
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Janet, I didn't know you were coming down.
One more this way. All right. Thank you. You're a great man.
Oh, you know,
Glad you
listen,
came.
anytime you need anything, just give me a holler.
I appreciate it.
Oh, and yes, thank you so much. I have the hoodie at home. I'm waiting for it to get cold enough, and where I'm warm, I'm going to wear it. Hopefully this weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let them know. Well, you've got my. You just, you know what? If they express it, I can give you my contact info. So you know what? You can actually tell them to give me a call. So it's 631. He's in one hurry. She wants to. We'll get out.
I'm sorry, no, take your pictures.
Yeah, 631-786-2528. Just give me my phone number. And if you need anything, just give me a holler, okay? Or, you know, message me or call me, whatever. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for jumping on Patreon, too. I really appreciate that. Come on, Adam, we gotta get a shot, too. Do we get our picture? You wanna get it on your phone?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Mr. Scott?
Yes, it was really nice.
Oh, what a
meeting you.
pleasure.
Oh, this is
All
a
right.
great, good day.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled. Have you listen? Let your library know, and give them
I know
my
there's a
email
lot,
and
there's a
contact.
lot of weather.
I'll come out to
There's people
Northwest
there. Yeah,
Jersey.
okay.
I'll bring my fishing rod with me, and
There you go.
I'm a huge fisherman.
then you and I are gonna be, you're gonna be best friends.
Thanks, Joe.
Oh. Hey, sorry, YouTube guys, it's time to go. They're chasing us out of the library. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to your comments, but if you put them up on the actual video when it goes to the library, I'll try to answer them. All right? Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.